that distributes low-cost oil to homeless shelters, food banks, and low-income housing groups. He also said he hoped the deal would present a friendly challenge to U.S. oil companies, which recently reported record quarterly profits, to use their windfall to help poor families survive the winter, apparently in vain. Though Central America was largely disciplined by Reaganite violence and terror, the rest of the hemisphere is falling out of control, particularly from Venezuela to Argentina, which was the poster child of the IMF and the Treasury Department until its economy collapsed under the policies they imposed. Much of the region has left-center governments. The indigenous populations have become much more active and influential, particularly in Bolivia and Ecuador, both major energy producers, where they either want oil and gas to be domestically controlled or, in some cases, oppose production altogether. Many indigenous people apparently do not see any reason why their lives, societies, and cultures should be disrupted or destroyed so that New Yorkers can sit in SUVs in traffic gridlock. Some are even calling for an Indian nation in South America. Meanwhile, the economic integration that is underway is reversing patterns that trace back to the Spanish conquests, with Latin American elites and economies linked to the imperial powers, but not to one another. Along with growing South-South interaction on a broader scale, these developments are strongly influenced by popular organizations that are coming together in the unprecedented international global justice movements, ludicrously called anti-globalization because they favor globalization that privileges the interests of people, not investors and financial institutions. For many reasons, the system of U.S. global dominance is fragile, even apart from the damage inflicted by Bush planners. One consequence is that the Bush administration's pursuit of the traditional policies of deterring democracy faces new obstacles. It is no longer as easy as before to resort to military coups and international terrorism to overthrow democratically elected governments, as Bush planners learned ruefully in 2002 in Venezuela. The strong line of continuity must be pursued in other ways for the most part. In Iraq, as we have seen, mass nonviolent resistance compelled Washington and London to permit the elections they had sought to evade. The subsequent effort to subvert the elections by providing substantial advantages to the administration's favorite candidate and expelling the independent media also failed. Washington faces further problems. The Iraqi labor movement is making considerable progress despite the opposition of the occupation authorities. The situation is rather like Europe and Japan after World War II, when a primary goal of the United States and United Kingdom was to undermine independent labor movements. As at home, for similar reasons, organized labor contributes in essential ways to functioning democracy with popular engagement. Many of the measures adopted at that time, withholding food, supporting fascist police, are no longer available. Nor is it possible today to rely on the labor bureaucracy of AIFLD to help undermine unions. Today, some American unions are supporting Iraqi workers, just as they do in Colombia, where more union activists are murdered than anywhere in the world. At least the unions now receive support from the United Steelworkers of America and others, while Washington continues to provide enormous funding for the government, which bears a large part of the responsibility. The problem of elections arose in Palestine much in the way it did in Iraq. As already discussed, the Bush administration refused to permit elections until the death of Yasser Arafat, aware that the wrong man would win. After his death, the administration agreed to permit elections, expecting the victory of its favored Palestinian Authority candidates. To promote this outcome, Washington resorted to much the same modes of subversion as in Iraq and often before. Washington used USAID as an invisible conduit in an effort to increase the popularity of the Palestinian Authority on the eve of crucial elections in which the governing party faces a serious challenge from the radical Islamic group Hamas, spending almost $2 million on dozens of quick projects before elections this week to bolster the governing Fatah faction's image with voters. In the United States, or any Western country, even a hint of such foreign interference would destroy a candidate, but deeply rooted imperial mentality legitimates such routine measures elsewhere. However, the attempt to subvert the elections again resoundingly failed. The U.S. and Israeli governments now have to adjust to dealing somehow with a radical Islamic party that approaches their traditional rejectionist stance, though not entirely, at least if Hamas really does mean to agree to an indefinite truce on the international border, as its leaders state. The U.S. and Israel, in contrast, insist that Israel must take over substantial parts of the West Bank and the forgotten Golan Heights. Hamas's refusal to accept Israel's right to exist mirrors the refusal of Washington and Jerusalem to accept Palestine's right to exist, a concept unknown in international affairs. Mexico accepts the existence of the United States, but not its abstract right to exist on almost half of Mexico, acquired by conquest. Hamas's formal commitment to destroy Israel places it on a par with the United States and Israel, which vowed formally that there could be no additional Palestinian state in addition to Jordan, until they relaxed their extreme rejectionist stand partially in the past few years, in the manner already reviewed. Although Hamas has not said so, it would come as no great surprise if Hamas were to agree that Jews may remain in scattered areas in the present Israel, while Palestine constructs huge settlement and infrastructure projects to take over the valuable land and resources, effectively breaking Israel up into unviable cantons, virtually separated from one another and from some small part of Jerusalem where Jews would also be allowed to remain. And they might agree to call the fragments a state. If such proposals were made, we would, rightly, regard them as virtually a reversion to Nazism, a fact that might elicit some thoughts. If such proposals were made, Hamas's position would be essentially like that of the United States and Israel for the past 5 years, after they came to tolerate some impoverished form of statehood. It is fair to describe Hamas as radical, extremist, and violent, and as a serious threat to peace and a just political settlement, but the organization is hardly alone in this stance. Elsewhere, traditional means of undermining democracy have succeeded. In Haiti, the Bush administration's favorite democracy-building group, the International Republican Institute, worked assiduously to promote the opposition to President Aristide, helped by the withholding of desperately needed aid on grounds that were dubious at best. When it seemed that Aristide would probably win any genuine election, Washington and the opposition chose to withdraw, a standard device to discredit elections that are going to come out the wrong way. Nicaragua in 1984 and Venezuela in December 2005 are examples that should be familiar. Then followed a military coup, expulsion of the president, and a reign of terror and violence vastly exceeding anything under the elected government. The persistence of the strong line of continuity to the present again reveals that the United States is very much like other powerful states. It pursues the strategic and economic interests of dominant sectors of the domestic population to the accompaniment of rhetorical flourishes about its dedication to the highest values. That is practically a historical universal, and the reason why sensible people pay scant attention to declarations of noble intent by leaders or accolades by their followers. One commonly hears that carping critics complain about what is wrong, but do not present solutions. There is an accurate translation for that charge. They present solutions, but I don't like them. In addition to the proposals that should be familiar about dealing with the crises that reach to the level of survival, a few simple suggestions for the United States have already been mentioned. 1. Accept the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court and the World Court. 2. Sign and carry forward the Kyoto Protocols. 3. Let the UN take the lead in international crises. 4. Rely on diplomatic and economic measures rather than military ones in confronting terror. 5. Keep to the traditional interpretation of the UN Charter. 6. Give up the Security Council veto and have a decent respect for the opinion of mankind, as the Declaration of Independence advises, even if power centers disagree. 7. cut back sharply on military spending and sharply increase social spending.